Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Ecolab's food safety webinar titled Large Flies, Strategies to Reduce Risk. Our presenter today is Dr. John Barquet. He is a senior scientist at Ecolab. Dr. Barquet has a PhD in urban entomology and leads Ecolab's pest elimination, product evaluation, and development projects, specializing in developing effective integrated pest management programs that deliver high-quality pest protection while limiting environmental impact. He is an expert on a wide range of pest elimination techniques for food and beverage processing, food service, hospitality, and related industries. Please ask any questions throughout using the Q&A feature in WebEx. Now, I will turn it over to Dr. Barquet.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and welcome everyone. Today we will be discussing the topic of large flies, also known as filth flies. These are very important pests in the food industry and do pose a significant risk to food safety. So our agenda today is as follows. We'll start by briefly talking about the fly's biology and behavior, and then we'll get into some prevention tips and talk about everything from selecting a pest provider to make sure that you've got the right strategies in place to minimize large flies within your facility. We'll also cover off on some seasonal pests. As we know, the house flies are seasonal, but there are other pests that are seasonal as well, and we'll touch base on those. So let's start by talking about the biology and behavior of filth flies. The major danger these flies pose is transmission of pathogens through their activities, and we'll get into some detail here. They do contaminate food with their filth, and when combined with lapses in time and temperature, this can contribute to the spread of disease. Filth flies carry more than 200 pathogens, including those that cause foodborne illness, Salmonella and E. coli. And they're transferred on the body parts. So we'll talk about the fly's mouth parts and how they can be involved in contaminating food and food handling surfaces. Okay, let's start by talking about the business impact in terms of how filth flies can affect food service facilities and their reputation in particular. First of all, everyone is an inspector now visiting a restaurant. News can spread very quickly through social media, generating negative publicity and affecting brand reputation. They generate staff and customer complaints. There may be compensation claims in terms of comping meals as well. And then reduction in trust and guest traffic in your facility can also result in the presence of large flies. Filth flies are seasonal pests, and they're mostly prevalent from April to November in warmer climates, June through July in colder climates. And the reason for the seasonality is that temperatures above 70 degrees Fahrenheit will allow for fly reproduction and emergence. Temperatures below 60 degrees Fahrenheit will significantly reduce filth fly activity. All right, let's talk about the major species here. Essentially, we've got three different types of filth flies. The most common one, of course, is the housefly on the left, and it can be identified by 4 stripes on the thorax there, which is the section right behind the head. And these 3 flies represent the majority of species we're concerned of, and then we have an Ecolab large fly program that we'll be covering off as well. So the housefly is 4 to 7 millimeters long and has 4 black stripes going down its back. And then in the center there, you'll see the blow and bottle flies, which are 4 to 16 millimeters long, with bodies decorated in metallic colors, usually blue, green, or bronze. And then the flesh fly, as its name implies, does feed only on carrion, and it's much larger than the housefly. It's 6 to 14 millimeters, so it looks like a giant housefly, except that it has 3 stripes on the thorax just behind the head there compared to the housefly. All 3 of these species are attracted to decaying organic matter and other types of filth. So more specifically for the common housefly, again, 3/16 to a 1/4 inch long, dull gray, 4 dark stripes on the thorax. It's a very common insect. It's common throughout the world. They lay eggs on animal feces, garbage, and decaying organic matter, and the life cycle takes 8 to 12 days. And each female can lay around 250 to 500 eggs in her lifetime. The bottlefly, generally they have these metallic blue, green, or copper-colored thorax, and these you'll find very commonly in garbage areas and compost and places like that. They can be even more abundant than houseflies in these areas. They lay eggs on garbage containing meat scraps, decaying organic matter, dead animals, and feces, and they enter structures in the fall to overwinter, so they will overwinter as adults. And their life cycle takes a little longer than the housefly, 10 to 25 days to complete. For the flesh fly, again, they're much larger than a housefly, and they've got those bright red eyes, so they're pretty easy to distinguish from the houseflies. They've got a checkerboard pattern on the abdomen, and they lay larvae on carrion or scraps of meat. So it's not actually eggs, they're actually laying larvae directly on the meat, and their life cycle is 10 to 20 days. Now, when we talk about the life cycle, this is what it is. It starts out as an egg. It goes through 3 different larval stages, so we call those maggots, and then it pupates, which is the dormant phase, and then the adult emerges from the pupa. So 6 days minimum development time, and they're notorious invaders because their ability to lay many eggs and grow from egg to adult in just under a week. So if optimal conditions are there, they can reproduce very quickly. A single female housefly typically lays about 75 to 150 eggs per batch, and usually lays up to 4 batches in her lifetime. So that's a lot of eggs from a single female. All right, now let's get into the delicious subject matter here of how flies can affect food safety, and we'll get into some specifics and the implications of houseflies being present in food service environments. Houseflies have a reflex, so they taste every surface that they land on, and we'll show you some close-up pictures here in just a second. In this photo, you can see the mouth part is extended, tasting and feeding upon a pastry. Houseflies can only consume liquidized food, so this is where it gets a little disgusting. But it is interesting and very disgusting fact that houseflies must first regurgitate or vomit onto their food source in order to liquidize it and then ingest the liquid. Houseflies are considered mechanical vectors of pathogens and filth because they will then season every surface they land on with whatever they landed on before. So let's take a close-up look at that sponging mouth part. And again, they have a reflex. Every time they land on a surface, they do taste that surface. So we'll take a closer look here. And this is the magnified housefly head showing the sponging mouth part, as we call it. And it's actually retracted. So in this picture, you can see the mouth part is retracted. Let's move in even closer, and we're using a scanning electron microscope here to really move in. Now what we can see at about 2,000 times magnification, we can see the folds at the end of the mouth part called pseudotrachea. And these help to absorb liquids and such during feeding. And we also see some rather suspicious material there outlined in the pseudotrachea. And let's move in even closer. And here we have about a 7,500 times magnification of the fly mouth part. And in this case, this fly was collected from a livestock farm. And there, flies mostly breed and feed in manure. These are E. coli bacteria that were identified. So we can obviously see how well houseflies can both pick up bacteria and have the potential to transfer it to uncontaminated surfaces. Okay, let's take a look at the feet now. Again, they're mechanical carriers. So shown in this scanning electron microscope picture here, this is the tarsus or the foot of the housefly. And the pulvillus is the sticky pad, so you can see the claws on the outside. The claws are for landing on rough surfaces to be able to hold on. And then the sticky pads in between the claws, called the pulvillus, are used to adhere to smooth surfaces. So houseflies are perfectly comfortable being on any surface in any orientation, and so they're very capable of picking things up and moving them around with their feet as well. Okay? And then fly speck. This is what your pest management provider will inspect for. Where flies frequent on a surface, they will leave characteristic markings, which come from their mouth parts as well as their feces. And these will be areas that will oftentimes be targeted with an insecticide treatment because they are areas frequented by the flies, and the flies are actually attracted to what we call this fly speck. And here we can see on a kitchen ceiling here, drop ceiling, actual fly speck along the, you can see the edges there. They do like to be up against edges, and in this case, this place obviously has or had, at one time had a very severe fly infestation. Now let's talk about solutions for filth flies and how to prevent them from becoming a problem at restaurants and other food handling facilities. In order for us to go after flies, we have to have an outside-in approach. There is no silver bullet, so we have to have multiple components in place. And I'll start by, in the lower left there, you'll see something called a stealth fly station. Now, this is a piece of equipment that is installed outside of the facility near an area that the flies are generally attracted to. So this might be a dumpster corral area. And it looks like a flat screen TV, but actually what it does is it's got an attractant that draws flies to the panel. And then the color black is very attractive to flies, and they do pay attention to contrast. So what the service specialist will do here is actually treat the surface of the fly station with a very fast-acting insecticide. So when the flies are drawn to the panel, they'll be quickly killed. And then we'll do some exterior treatments. So where the flies are landing, again, we're looking for fly speck. It could be surfaces on the dumpster itself, areas around windows and doors and such that are out of reach of people, but where the flies are landing to further reduce the amount of fly potential to get inside. So with those first two steps, we can keep even 50% of the flies from even getting inside. And then exclude. This is where your service specialist will work with you on identifying what are the opportunities you have and your staff has for decreasing fly entry into the facility. So we want to make sure we minimize those entry points. And then on the inside, two things will happen. There will be some lights installed. We do have a new LED fly light that uses much less energy than the previous bulbs that did in traditional fly lights. So good energy savings as well as just as effective, but it's not the most important part. Now, every fly program typically does have fly lights, but again, it's these treatments, the interior spot treatments in places where the flies are landing. All of this combined will significantly reduce the presence of flies within a food handling facility. So let's take a look at some prevention and action steps here. First of all, let's locate and eliminate exterior breeding sites. Pest control and prevention must be a partnership, and I can't emphasize that enough. It's got to be a partnership between the facility staff and your pest management provider. And your PMP will inspect the exterior for conducive conditions and make recommendations to correct them. And these can include things like were laid out here: spilled garbage, animal droppings, grass clippings, entryways, and such like that. Okay. Next, let's reduce the fly entrance opportunities. And here are some things that we can do, reducing the attractants and such that might be around in garbage areas and such. Keep doors closed, and that includes the drive-through windows as well. If those can be kept closed on an automatic basis, or there may be air doors, air curtains placed above those. The most common way that we do see flies get into, for example, quick service restaurants, is through the drive-through windows. So it's very important that those be able to close automatically, and then sometimes there'll be an air curtain that can be installed above those as well. And then pesticide applications to resting sites will be done by your pest management provider. We do not recommend that employees of the facility make any pesticide applications because licenses are required for that. And then what we want to do is harvest or kill. And next is to kill the flies once they get into the facility. So again, these will be with the light traps. We don't recommend fly swatters. Of course, they'll splat the fly, and there's a food safety issue there. And then there'll be targeted pesticide applications made by your pest management provider. So lastly, physical methods such as exclusion are necessary to reduce fly entry. Of course, there's other pests that we need to do this with as well, like rodents. We need to make sure that the facility is in good structural repair. Other exclusion tools and strategies, again, keeping those doors and windows closed, proper screen size, and then there's opportunities around the HVAC system. Many facilities will have negative air pressure, and as soon as that drive-through window opens, the flies can be sucked into the facility. So there are adjustments that can be made to the HVAC, so that you've got neutral or positive air pressure. That can significantly reduce the entrance of flies into your facility. And then there are other physical methods such as air doors or air curtains, and they have to be installed correctly to make sure the wind is blowing in the correct direction, keep the flies out. And then there are strip doors or plastic strip doors that reduce fly movement within the facility. All right, so we've got a case study here, and we had a quick service restaurant that was in an area with high fly pressure, and we collected fly counts inside the restaurant for 1 week before implementing our fly program, including the stealth fly station, LED fly lights, interior and exterior insecticide treatments. So each week, we counted the number of flies we caught inside the restaurant, and if you're catching a lot of flies in the blue boards of the lights, that can generally mean that there's some parts of the program that aren't working as well. We don't really want to rely on the light itself to reduce the population. So we want to make sure all of those treatments are in place. And what you can see from this case study is after 5 weeks of being on the program, we saw a 72% reduction in the number of flies entering the facility. So it is effective. There's no silver bullet. It's an outside-in approach, and we have to have every component in place for the program to be successful. Okay, so to summarize, there is no silver bullet. Can't say that enough. Work in partnership with your PMP. Reducing fly activity indoors requires an integrated approach. So starting from the outside with exterior treatments and equipment, followed by exclusion to reduce fly entry, and then interior treatments and fly traps to kill the flies once they get inside. Okay, so I'm going to get into some pest seasonality here, and we will have time for questions at the end, so if you've got questions on the flies, make sure you keep those coming. And I would like to take a few minutes just to discuss some seasonal pests and when they are most prevalent. So weather in terms of temperature and precipitation can significantly influence pest activity. And last year, pretty much throughout North America, we saw unusually high temperatures around the areas, and this will likely result in a higher pest presence this year. So I'm sorry to give you some bad news here, but we're probably headed to a pretty heavy pest season. So in terms of summer pests, these are the most common ones that we're going to be seeing here. So we talked about large flies, mosquitoes with Zika and everything that gets in the news related to that. Mosquitoes have become much more important to address. And then we've got occasional invaders such as ants, that lots of different species of ants that can be problems. They come up around the summertime. And then we've got small flies. We didn't talk about small flies today, but by those we mean fruit flies. There's also forward flies or drain flies as they're called. And we can certainly have some questions on those if anybody has any. And then we've got the paradomestic species of cockroaches. These are ones that do live outside but can take advantage of our environment. That would be like the American cockroach. People call that the palmetto bug in the South because they don't want to scare off the tourists, but they are really just large cockroaches. And then German cockroaches are actually a year-round pest. That is a domestic species of cockroach. So you'll only find German cockroaches in human habitats and not even vacant buildings. They require the food, the water, and the harborage that people provide. But we do see their populations go down a little in the winter and then back up in the summer. So there is some seasonality to their numbers. And then we've got other occasional invaders such as centipedes, millipedes, spiders, and then stinging insects. So all of these are things that we'll typically see during the summer months. And then when we get into the fall, of course, things are cooling, so rodents are going to be looking for a way to get inside or warmer environments. So typically that's when we do see their presence increase inside structures. There's also occasional invaders such as the Asian ladybird beetle. These were used and are still used today as biological control on farms. And the first thing that the lady beetles want to do when they're released is fly away. So they are very attracted to structures, especially in the fall. They're looking for places to overwinter as adults. Same with box elder bugs. Box elder bugs, a very common occasional invader that will also overwinter as adults. And I think everybody's probably had some experience with some of these during the fall months when they try to get into our homes and such. Then there are cluster flies, and cluster flies are flies that overwinter as adults. They look like house flies, but they're actually parasites of earthworms. So they really are not associated with the garbage and such like that, but they do look a lot like house flies. And they again, looking for warm areas during the fall. And then we get the paradomestic species of cockroaches, like the American cockroach, and then we mentioned the German cockroach is a year-round pest. And then we get into the winter, and this is the cold months, so we'll get other animals coming in addition to rodents. We can get birds, and then you're dealing with all of the overwintering insects that overwinter as adults, as well as the cockroaches there. So winter, we don't see any real difference in German cockroaches other than a slight reduction in their populations. And again, they require people to survive, so you'll only find them in the human habitat. And then we get to the spring, and this is where everybody now is waking up. Okay, so all of those adult insects that were overwintering as adults, so the large flies, and we get the mosquitoes will begin to emerge, and lots of different types of mosquitoes, and those that do spread the Zika virus, the Aedes aegypti, and albopictus are present in the lower smile of the United States. So we're going to keep an eye on that. And then a variety of species of ants, depending on where you are located. Certainly in the southern tier of the United States, we've got very pestiferous species such as the Argentine ant, white-footed ants, and these can be in very large numbers, and there is going to be a need for some sort of control around your facility for those. We talked about fruit flies, or small flies. These are breeding indoors. They can breed outside, but generally about 60% or so of the restaurant industry does experience small fly infestations from time to time. And there, something is fermenting. Something is rotting, and we have to get to the core of it. So this is where your pest management provider will identify what are the conducive conditions, and then there are some treatments and such that they can do to reduce their presence. And then all those other occasional invaders we talked about, millipedes, American cockroaches, and German cockroaches will be present in the springtime. Okay, so those are the pests, and I ran through a lot of them very quickly there, but feel free to ask me any questions on any pest issues you might have. But I'd like to, before we go to that, let's discuss how to best select a pest management provider for successful partnership and solid pest solutions. Okay, so the key traits are proper credentials. That's again why we don't want our employees within the restaurant applying insecticides. Oftentimes, if it's a commercial facility, you have to have a license in order to apply a pesticide product. So they need to have the proper credentials. They need to be licensed and certified. And then they need to be consistent. They need to provide consistent protocols that eliminate pests. So it needs to be very science-based and something where they can consistently deliver results. And then provide the relevant inspections. So, not everything is going to be conducive to pests. So definitely pointing out if there's food on the floor, well, that's a restaurant, right? So we're not going to be picking on that. But if there's food accumulating in an area that's not getting cleaned properly, those do need to get addressed. And then they'll provide the proper recommendations and then take that outside-in approach that we talked about to eliminate your pests. Okay, with that, Melissa, I'm ready to take some questions.
All right, so that concludes our formal remarks for today's presentation. We're now going to move over into the Q&A. So just a reminder to submit your questions via the Q&A panel on the WebEx screen. So I'm just going to take a minute and look through a couple of our questions here. So one of the questions we have is, what pesticides are most effective for fly control? Okay,
so this would be for the adult fly because obviously we want to target them. And generally the pesticide industry is it got a class of insecticide called pyrethroid, and pyrethroids were pretty heavy in the pest control industry, pyrethroid heavy. Not a lot of new active ingredients coming out these days, but pyrethroids work quite well because it doesn't take much to drop the fly. So there's going to be the insecticides that are used as aerosols. Okay, and these are typically pyrethrin-based, and they do not have residuals. So if they were to be sprayed inside, they would create a fog or a mist, if you will, depending on what the particular formulation is. Those are designed to knock down the adults quickly within the facility, but have no residual. Pyrethrins do not have a long residual life. Whereas on the surfaces where flies land, they're going to be using what's called a pyrethroid, and that is the synthetic form of pyrethrins that actually has residual properties. So when your pest management provider applies them to a surface that flies are frequenting, the fly will come and land on that and pick up a lethal dose quite quickly. So those are generally two different types. There's space sprays and residual insecticides. There are some fly baits. Baits that basically attract the fly and they feed on it and die, but those must be containerized. They have to be in a bait station. They can't be scattered. There was a time when we could scatter the bait around a dumpster area. We can no longer do that, so laws and regulations have really tightened that up. So baits are not as effective against flies as they used to be.
Great, thank you. Our next question reads, are the same pesticides used on the large fly effective on smaller fruit flies?
They are, but the places where the flies are going to be landing and such are going to be different because the chances are the fruit flies are breeding inside. And as I mentioned, somewhere something is fermenting. So the best solution is to clean that up and get rid of the breeding source. The space sprays will drop the small flies, but you're not getting to the source. You're just dropping the adults. So they'll be back very quickly. They are just like with house flies. They lay many, many eggs in their lifetime. And somewhere something's fermenting, and it's not just the drains. They can be in stagnant water. We've got what's called the dark-eyed fruit fly, which is a larger species of fruit fly that can breed in very rancid conditions compared to the red-eyed fruit fly, which we're more used to seeing in a recycling area and places like that. So getting to the source is really key for small flies, and it can be easier said than done. A very small area can produce a lot of flies. So that's where you really need to depend on your pest management provider to do a great inspection, point out the areas that need to be cleaned up, and then address them. So that's the best way to go after small flies.
Thank you. So one of the questions is around the LED fly lights and conventional fly lights. So how well do LED lights work compared to the conventional?
Well, a lot of research has gone into this, and there are UV emitting LED lights. So the Stealth LED fly light of Ecolab actually has the same catch rate as the standard fluorescent UV lights do. So same catch rate, it is a smaller footprint, and it's got about a 60% energy savings because of the LED lights. Also, LED lights do not need to be changed as frequently, so this is where we really need to educate the industry and such that they only generally need to be changed every 3 years versus every year for the fluorescent bulbs. So quite a bit of difference there, quite a bit of difference in energy, but in terms of the catch rate, they perform equally well.
All right. Next question. You mentioned earlier that on the exterior station, the pesticide is applied on an exposed area. Can this put staff at risk of potential poisoning?
No, not really. What we're going to do is we're going to install this in the dumpster area. Just the perimeter of the screen is treated, and it's generally low toxicity material to people. But we're going to be putting it where the flies are, and people generally aren't going to be frequenting that area very much. So the short answer is no, but we've got to be careful about using the word safe and pesticide in the same sentence. But if applied properly, targeted treatments, it poses a very little risk to people. Good question.
All right, one of the questions is around the Stealth LED fly light that you mentioned during today's presentation, and the question is, does the station collect the dead flies, or do the flies end up on the ground?
They actually fly away and die because the poison doesn't work that quickly. No, it does not collect the flies. Generally, they'll land on the panel, and then when they begin to become affected by the insecticide, it excites them a little bit, so they're going to fly away, and they're no longer interested in going inside your restaurant. Yeah, so go ahead.
The next question we have here reads, I've heard the chemical used for the external cell stations may degrade quickly under warm weather conditions. How stable is that pesticide?
It's actually quite stable in light and heat. They've been designed, pyrethroids have been designed to be stable under those conditions. Where what's going to really play more of a bigger role here is if we get a lot of precipitation. So if there's a lot of rain to wash the insecticide off, that will have to be treated more frequently.
So one of the questions is, how long can a housefly live?
Generally, they don't live for very long. Once they get to the adult stage, that's the reproductive stage. So, believe it or not, only a couple of weeks as an adult. They can maybe live a little bit longer than that, but they're short-lived, just a couple of weeks, which is long enough for them to reproduce and lay the eggs and go to the next generation.
Thank you. Just give me a moment here. I'm going to look through some of our other questions. We've got a lot of great questions coming in today.
Great. Yeah, these webinars are usually better over lunchtime.
So as we just spoke about the housefly and how long it can live, one of the questions is, you covered off on life cycle of the fly. Is the 8 to 12 days from maggot to fly or maggot to death of the fly?
It's egg to adult. Egg to adult. So, egg, larva, pupa, adult. It's the full life cycle.
In regards to exterior treatment, what area do you treat on the exterior? Example, close to the building or away from the building?
Well, we're going to definitely want to go where the flies are. So that's going to be the dumpster area. There's going to be spot treatments made to, spot is defined as a 2 square foot area where the flies are landing. And so the labels have to be followed, of course. There also might be points around entryways that are out of reach of people, but where the flies are landing. Generally, the housefly spends most of its time at rest above 2 meters. So they typically forage. They're going to forage low to the ground when they're looking for food, and then when they rest, they're going to generally be up around 6 feet or so off the ground is where they prefer. And that's one of the reasons that the fly lights are installed where they are, at the height that they are. It's important that they're out of traffic, but they're also placed in a place where the flies are likely to be captured. So there is some strategy to the distance and as well as the height that we install with fly lights.
So the next question is, are gold sticks okay to be installed above food preparation surfaces?
It's not a good idea really to do anything like a fly light or gold sticks. Gold sticks, for people who don't know what that is it's basically a golden rod with fly attractant in it, and then it's got a sticky substance on it to capture the flies. They're really quite problematic in the back of the house where people are busy. You certainly don't want to touch them. So they need to be installed, I would definitely say, within 10 feet of a food handling surface, but not in an area where it's actually going to draw the flies over that food handling or that prep surface, because that's again, we don't want to pose any danger from the fly parts, if you will, or bacteria that they're carrying. I do want to mention there are fly lights that do zap the flies. Not recommended for the back of the house because those will actually scatter the fly parts. So really the fly lights that should be used should have glue boards in them, adhesives for capturing them. Gold sticks, it's just hard to find a good place in the restaurant to put those, and really their effectiveness is not all that great. So I don't recommend gold sticks.
All right, so the next question reads, what kind of flies would have infested our grease trap, and what can we do to keep them away after cleaning the trap?
Yeah, more than likely, because that's a very rancid area, more than likely that's going to be what's called a forward fly or a humpbacked fly. And they also call them scuttle flies because of the way that they move around. They will breed in very unsanitary conditions, including sewage, so it's not unusual for them to get into the grease trap. And there are some treatments that can be done, but of course we want to try and empty that grease. But find out where the flies are breeding. Another problem with forward flies is that they will breed in sewage. So if there's a broken drain line somewhere under the slab, that can be a real problem, which means that that pipe needs to be repaired. Not knowing exactly the configuration of your grease trap, they could breed anywhere within that area, and so that needs to be changed regularly. And then, of course, there's opportunity for spillage. One thing I've noticed in some restaurant roofs, if you don't have a good hood maintenance, the grease can actually start accumulating on the roof itself, and that can be attractive to a wide variety of pests. So it's very important that you manage that grease properly, and don't allow the hoods and such to get so filthy that the grease begins to accumulate up on the roof. That can be a real problem.
All right. So the next question is, can pesticides contaminate food if a food handler doesn't wash their hands and they touch the treated areas?
Yep, this is a hypothetical, right? But of course, hand washing is extremely important in restaurants. So I would say that make sure you've got good hand washing practices there. And really, the reason that the pesticides are placed where they are is because that's where the flies are going to be, and people will not be able to access it. So again, generally at least 2 meters up is where they're making these applications, and it's very targeted, and targeted where the flies actually are landing or frequenting. So again, always wash your hands. It's the number one cause of foodborne illness is lack of proper hand washing. So let's make sure that we're doing that, and you've got a good program in place for that.
All right, so one question that came in is around fly programs. Is there a difference between fly programs, or do they all include the same steps?
Well, it really should be an outside-in approach, but I can't speak for the entire pest control industry out there. But this is a very general approach that's taken. We want to make sure that we're keeping at least 50% of the flies from even getting inside. So you've really got to have that outside-in approach. There's going to be different types of equipment. There's different fly lights. So it's all going to depend on the particular company that you hire. Not all of them will have proprietary equipment like Ecolab does in terms of the fly station, for example. But the programs can be very similar if, depending on the company, and but really it needs to be consistent, it needs to be thorough, and it needs to be updated on a monthly basis.
Okay. One question is, where should LED lights be placed?
And that's going to be based on the inspection, and generally we want to have some lights in the back of the house. That's where the flies are going to be most frequent. Again, 2 meters up and then out of the way of traffic, but where they can intercept the flies. And really, if the program's working very well from the insecticide application standpoint, if the outside-in approach, that glue board should not be filling up on a monthly basis, but generally the fly lights will be maintained on a monthly basis, replacing the glue boards to make sure that it's effective. But as the glue boards start filling up, of course, the catch rate's going to go down, so it's important that they be serviced on a monthly basis.
So we have a couple of questions in regards to fruit flies. One of them is around what is the lifespan of a fruit fly, typically?
The dark-eyed fruit fly actually lives a little longer than the red-eyed, so we got about 4 weeks in the adult phase for the dark-eyed fruit fly. And that, again, is the larger fruit fly. It's very mobile, so it can get into dining areas and places like that. So the red-eyed fruit fly is generally about 2 weeks or so, but so it does depend on the species. But most restaurants today have a problem with the dark-eyed fruit fly, and that's because it can breed in many different areas of the restaurant.
Thank you. So in regards to fruit flies, here's a specific question. What do you recommend for fruit flies, especially around the bar area?
Yeah, now this is the true bar fly, okay? It is, the fruit flies are there for a reason. And sometimes you might notice a yeasty type odor in this area? Well, that comes from like the beer taps and places like that. There may be some corrosion over time where you've got liquids leaking down into voids. Fruit flies in a bar area, it's a very complex area, obviously, and it's very difficult to be maintaining that sanitation. But what can happen is in these older facilities, especially the older structures, is we start to see layers of construction, and that's fruit flies. If liquid gets back there, any organic matter gets back there, the fruit flies can be breeding in these very tight and difficult to access locations. Many times there's a drain or such that may be contributing to it, but the drain may not be accessible for cleaning. I mean, how many of us have seen restaurant equipment up over drains where really the drain cannot be accessed for cleaning? That can be a real problem. Your pest management provider should be able to provide treatments in these areas to get to the flies and prevent them from breeding in there. But really it comes down to a very careful inspection, looking at these layers, where are the liquids seeping, what are the opportunities in terms of organic matter. It doesn't take very much to produce a lot of flies. So that's really what it takes, is a good eye and an attention to detail to make sure that their breeding sources are cleaned up.
All right. So we got a good question again that came in around fruit flies. The question is, when fruit flies land on food, are they laying eggs on it?
I'm so sorry to tell you this, but yes, they are. We've all eaten our fair share of fruit fly eggs in our lifetime. If you see those fruit flies around your bananas at home, guess what? There's fruit flies in the bananas. All right. But they're really not, from the standpoint of a food safety risk, it hasn't really been linked yet with small flies. You could think that they would be able to pick up pathogens and things like that, but definitely it's something where, yes, they do have a reflex to lay their eggs when they land on food. So I'm sorry to tell you that.
All right. So back to large flies. The question is, are flies attracted to certain colors?
Well, really what the housefly in particular is attracted to the color black, and if there's really good contrast too, they really recognize contrast in colors and such. So some of these are taken advantage of course, in designing equipment and places like that, but generally darker colors are attractive to flies. Same with mosquitoes, all right? So mosquitoes are also attracted to the color black. And it's thought that the reason for this is, basically evolving through the livestock that we've been doing for thousands of years. The housefly in particular has become very well adapted to the urban environment. So they're very good at learning their area, and they're highly attracted to contrast colors, and the color black in particular.
All right. We'll take a couple more questions here. So another question that we have is back again around fruit flies. Do fruit flies stay close in proximity to where they are breeding?
The red-eyed fruit fly does. Again, this is typically in the recycling areas and places like that. The dark-eyed fruit fly is larger and much more mobile, so we can find the dark-eyed fruit fly anywhere within a facility, hundreds of feet away from its breeding source. So the dark-eyed fruit fly, yeah, we're gonna find that far away from the breeding sources. It's not unusual to have that happen.
All right, thank you. So here's a kind of a generic question around bait.
Okay.
As we use the same type of bait all the time, are pests or rodents, do they become immune to the bait?
Immunity, probably not, but what we see sometimes when only one type of insecticide or pesticide is used, we get what are called resistant populations. Now, this is where, for whatever reason, we're killing off the susceptibles, the very young and the dumb, and then we're left with the smart. And also, it's possible that over time, if we're killing off populations, the survivors have a genetic basis for being able to survive, and they may be able to metabolize the poison better. There's different modes of resistance, and it really does depend on the pesticide. But, you want to use a variety of tools to go after these pests. It's not, again, there's no silver bullet, but to avoid resistance, certainly we need to have multiple components in place because it is possible that you could get a resistant population over time.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a couple last-minute questions here. So the next question reads, are there any natural enemies for houseflies rather than the use of pesticides?
Yes, there are. A very good question. In fact, farming communities use them a lot. It's a parasitic wasp, and they're tiny little wasps, and they don't sting people. And what's done is the pupa of these wasps are scattered around the farm area where the manure is and such, and they will parasitize the larvae of the fly. So actually the pupa. So they are available. They can be ordered online. They need to be put out regularly. Every couple of weeks they need to be put back out. So this is going to work in a farming area. Farming community probably will not have any result in the urban setting because of where the flies may be breeding. You've got to get the parasites to the areas where the flies are actually breeding. But they can be very effective, and farmers that use these parasitic wasps do not apply pesticides in the same area because obviously they'll kill off the wasps. So it's very effective. It is a good biological approach and highly recommended where the flies are actually breeding.
All right, our next question is, what is the best way to prevent flies from breeding in rarely used floor drains?
Yeah, and so if there is a rarely used floor drain, chances are that's going to dry up and it won't become a source. Usually the fruit flies in a drain area are breeding not down in the pipe, but they're breeding up around the surface where there's organic matter, so around the rims and places like that. They're not going to be breeding down in the P-trap or any place like that, generally not. So the cleaning and such should be focused up at the top to remove that organic matter, and then look for other opportunities too where these flies could be breeding. Again, all it takes is stagnant water somewhere, broken floor tile. As long as there's moisture and organic matter, flies can breed. So very much we need attention to detail when it comes to removing fruit flies.
All right, just looking through the last couple of questions here. All right. So I think the last question we'll take here reads, why do we often see flies collecting on electrical cords even if the cords are clean? Yeah,
they like edges. They like to be up on surfaces and vertical edges and such. And they may also, maybe the color of the cord too is attractive to the fly if it's a black cord. Very good observation on your part. That is an area that, providing that it's out of reach, will be a targeted insecticide application on some of these drop cords because as you observed, the flies like to land on them.
All right. Well, that concludes our presentation and Q&A for today. I would like to thank you for attending Ecolab's Food Safety webinar titled Large Flies, Strategies to Reduce Risk. A recording of the presentation will be available at the website listed on your screen later this week. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.